This might surprise you, but most of us have no idea what we're doing when we say that something is morally wrong. Now, that's not an insult. I'm sure that you feel very strongly about certain moral issues. But when we say something like torturing puppies for fun is wrong, it's really difficult to say what it is, literally, that we're doing when we say it. We might be describing a feature of the world, like the act of torturing puppies possesses the property of wrongness, just like the sky possesses the property of blueness. Or we might just be expressing our feelings, like our immense distaste for people who torture puppies, or for the act itself. Or we might just be implicitly commanding others not to torture puppies when we say that torturing puppies is morally wrong. Or maybe all of the above. Or maybe none of the above. I'm willing to bet you actually don't know. Maybe you haven't even thought about this before. But the good news is most philosophers don't know either, although they have thought about this quite a bit. Some philosophers have spent their entire careers trying to figure out answers to these kinds of questions. But the answers remain painfully elusive. And even charting out the space of possibilities can often seem like traversing a merciless abyss of abstract nonsense. Welcome to the domain of metaethics. So, metaethics is the branch of philosophy that analyzes the nature of morality itself. This is different from giving a theory of right and wrong, which instead falls under the domain of normative ethics. Metaethics examines more foundational questions in moral thinking. It asks questions like, what are moral judgments about? What are we doing psychologically when we make them? And what do they ultimately mean? And the fact that these questions are so foundational is part of what makes metaethics so difficult. It kind of combines many other areas of philosophy, like philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, epistemology, and metaphysics, and it applies those things specifically to the domain of ethics. So if you don't have a good handle on all that other stuff, it's really difficult to understand what's going on in metaethics. But to simplify things here, we'll just focus on three specific angles of analysis for tackling metaethical questions. The first angle in analyzing metaethical questions is semantic. The semantic angle refers to questions about the meaning of moral statements. They ask things like whether or not moral judgments actually express beliefs that can be true or false, like saying things like the Earth orbits the sun, which can be true or false and is true. But in addition to semantic questions, there are also metaphysical questions we can ask about morality. Specifically, this has to do with the nature of moral properties, if those exist. Because if moral judgments are true or false, they have to be true or false in virtue of something. Specifically, they have to be true or false in virtue of whether or not some action or person has certain moral qualities or properties. And metaphysical questions quickly arise concerning whether these moral properties actually exist. And if they do exist, what are they like? I mean, what is the property of goodness, metaphysically? And finally, there are psychological questions. Psychological questions examine the mental states involved in moral judgments. They ask whether we're actually forming beliefs, or organizing our emotions, or thinking in terms of commands and rules when we're making moral judgments. These questions ask which mental states are fundamental to morality. Now, comprehensive positions in metaethics typically try to address all three angles of analysis. And we'll now turn to some of the most common ones you may come across. The first comprehensive position we'll talk about is cognitivism. Cognitivism states that moral judgments work just like non-moral judgments. Moral judgments express beliefs, and these beliefs can be either true or false, just like factual judgments. The meaning of torturing puppies is wrong is just the relevant facts about the world that make that statement true or false. In this case, the fact that torturing puppies has the property of wrongness. This works just like non-moral language. When we say that the sky is blue, we just mean that that thing up there has the property of blueness. So moral judgments and judgments of fact fundamentally aren't all that different. Psychologically, cognitivists again emphasize the continuity between moral and non-moral judgments, saying that whatever is happening in non-moral situations when we make claims about the world or say things about how the world is, we're doing the exact same thing when we make moral claims about the way the world is, at least in terms of the kind of mental state that that judgment expresses. So both semantically and psychologically, cognitivism simplifies our analysis of moral statements by emphasizing their similarity to non-moral ones. But the challenge for cognitivism is metaphysics. Cognitivists have to explain what makes moral statements true or false. It's much easier to figure out what makes the sky is blue true, because we can all see the sky and we can all see that it's blue. But our reasons for accepting the wrongness of torturing puppies isn't so straightforward, even though we all agree that it's wrong to torture puppies. So, as a result, cognitivism branches off into a couple different camps based on their competing theories of how to explain the metaphysics of moral statements. So, one approach that cognitivists take is called moral realism. This position states that moral facts exist independently of anything we might think about them. Moral facts are made true or false by features of the world, just like non moral facts are. So you might be a realist about the wrongness of torturing puppies in the same way that you're a realist about the blueness of the sky. And within realism, there are two other branches. There's naturalist realism, and then there's non-naturalist realism. Naturalist realism holds to the analogy that moral properties are just like non-moral properties, meaning that they are natural, they are part of the world around us. They are built into the world in the same way that colors and sounds are. Theories that explain moral properties entirely in terms of something like pleasure or pain or welfare, like Sam Harris's natural moralities, are all examples of this sort of view. Then there's non-naturalist realism. This holds that moral properties are different from natural properties. They still exist, they're certainly real, but they're just different. We can't exactly study them with science. They're not reducible to other natural properties. They're special somehow. And explaining how they are is one of the big challenges for non-naturalist realism. Another group of cognitivists subscribe to what we call error theory. Error theorists state that while moral beliefs attempt to describe reality, they ultimately fail to do so because there are no corresponding moral properties. All positive moral claims are false because the properties that they purport to describe, or the properties that would need to exist in order for them to be true, don't exist. And finally, there are subjectivist theories. These theories focus on what's happening in the mind that gives meaning to our moral beliefs. Moral claims are true or false based on subjective facts about a person's attitudes. And in this brand of cognitivism, you can have individual subjectivism, which just focuses on a single person's mental situation. You could have cultural relativism, which has to do with the mental situation, the beliefs, the facts about people's psychology in a group. Or you could have ideal observer theories, which argue that moral judgments are true or false in virtue of what some ideal rational agent would do under full information about the situation. So torturing puppies is wrong because an ideally rational person who has all the facts about a situation would never do it, or something like that. Now, there are definitely other forms of cognitivism, but these are just the most common. Then there's non-cognitivism. Non-cognitivists deny that moral statements actually express beliefs or can be true or false at all. Instead, they serve other linguistic, psychological, and metaphysical functions. So even though moral judgments look like they express beliefs, they actually don't, according to non-cognitivism. Semantically, this means that moral judgments cannot be true or false. Instead, moral judgments perform other linguistic roles, like expressing a preference or giving a command. But they don't actually describe a feature of the world. They don't actually say that the world is a certain way, or that some part of the world has a certain property, even though it looks that way. Under the hood, that's actually not what's going on, according to non-cognitivism. Psychologically, non-cognitivists hold that moral judgments primarily involve non-belief states, like emotions, desires, volitions. Now, why would anyone bother to go the non-cognitivist route? Well, it actually solves a couple important problems for cognitivists. The first is that cognitivists struggle to explain what makes moral judgments inherently normative or motivating. It doesn't seem like beliefs generally motivate us to do anything. The fact that the sky is blue and my belief that the sky is blue doesn't actually motivate me to do anything. Whereas my belief that torturing puppies is wrong does motivate me not to ever torture puppies and to have a very negative opinion towards people who do. So the inherently normative or action-guiding nature of moral judgments makes it less likely that they work just like non-moral beliefs, and non-cognitivism captures this. On the other hand, Non-cognitivists get to avoid all the troubles of figuring out a moral metaphysics. If moral judgments don't express beliefs and they're not true or false, then we don't have to give an account of moral properties that make moral statements true or false, because those don't exist and we don't care about them because moral judgments can't be true or false. That's just not how they work. So non-cognitivists get to avoid this issue altogether. And just like with cognitivism, there are different versions of non-cognitivism. The earliest and simplest, which goes back to A.J. Ayer, is called Emotivism. And this simply states that moral judgments are just expressions of our emotions about certain actions. This is sometimes called the boo hooray theory of morality, because it explains moral judgments as our expressions of positive or negative emotions towards certain actions. So the idea that torturing puppies is wrong is just my expression of boo torturing puppies. Then there's prescriptivism, which is associated with R.M. Hare. Prescriptivism holds that moral judgments are really just universal commands. So the judgment that torturing puppies is wrong is really just an implicit command for everybody to not torture puppies. Ever. And then there's expressivism, or projectivism, which is closely related. And this is associated with Simon Blackburn and Alan Gibbard. Expressivists believe that moral judgments express complex attitudes, like endorsements of norms or intentions to carry out plans. And expressivism gets really complicated about exactly what sort of attitude we express when we make moral judgments. But the bottom line is that whatever it is, it's not a belief. All of these versions of non-cognitivism capture the idea that moral judgments are fundamentally motivating in ways that non-moral judgments aren't. And they also don't have to worry about giving a metaphysics of moral properties. And those are two really big points in favor of non-cognitivism. But of course, there are some pretty serious problems with it. For one thing, it's pretty unintuitive. It means that we're all terribly wrong about the way that we're thinking about morality. Because judgments like torturing puppies is wrong really look like beliefs that can be true or false. But according to non-cognitivism, this utterly intuitive analysis is completely mistaken. Of course, it's possible. I mean, we could all be wrong about all of our moral beliefs. Or not beliefs, I should say. But it still might be nicer if the correct metaethical theory was a little more intuitive. But the bigger challenge for non-cognitivists is that the connection between moral and non-moral judgments seems to go much deeper than they allow. Specifically, moral judgments can appear and work just fine in classical truth-functional logic, and nobody bats an eye. And this is really weird if moral judgments aren't supposed to be truth-functional. For example, I can say if it's wrong to torture puppies, then it's wrong to torture this puppy. And I can use that conditional in a logical argument. But this shouldn't work if moral judgments don't express truth-functional beliefs. Now, this is pretty esoteric stuff, and it gets into what's called the Frege-Geach problem, or the continuity problem for non-cognitivism. The main point is just that if, as non-cognitivists say, moral beliefs aren't really beliefs at all, they have to do a really good job of explaining why it seems so natural to think of them as beliefs, and why they work so well as beliefs in so many contexts, including logic. So why does any of this actually matter? Well, I think it matters when we engage in really deep moral disagreements with people, because very often some of our first-level moral disagreements might actually stem from higher-order metaethical disagreements. If you see morality as objective and someone else sees it as relativistic, you might approach a disagreement with that person in a very different way, and hopefully in a way that's more productive. If you understand the different options that you have when thinking about ethical issues, you might better engage with others when debating them. So metaethics can help us to clarify the moral disagreements that we have with other people, and ideally smooth out any unnecessary friction that might arise from miscommunication, from misunderstanding the way the other person is thinking about morality. And it's also a good idea to reflect on your own moral beliefs and think about what you actually mean by them. When you say that torturing puppies is wrong, what are you actually doing? I started this video by saying that you probably don't know the answer. And at this point, you might still not know the answer, and that's okay. The point is that now at least you know some of the options that some really smart people who have thought a lot about these problems have explored as well. And that's more or less the basics of metaethics. And if it's the first time you've ever heard any of that stuff, I'd be really interested to know which theory you naturally are gravitating towards. Do you think intuitively you're more of a realist, more of an expressivist, more of a subjectivist or a relativist? Let me know in the comments below. Me personally, I really like expressivism, and I'll probably do a video in the future about it in more detail. But for this video, I really hope you just learned something that helps you think about your own moral beliefs and the moral beliefs of others a little more clearly. And if you did, feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more Frank Philosophy.